The test is in 4-part, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between an assistant librarian and a woman who wants to use the internet in the library. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning. I'd like to register to use the internet in the library.
Do you have a library card?
Yes, I've been a member for 6 months, but I've never used the internet services before.
No problem. Can I have your full name, please?
Linda Jane Milton.
So, Milton is your surname?
Yes.
And Linda, L-I-N-D-A?
Well, no, actually, it's L-Y-N-D-A.
Linda, Jane.
And, Jane isn't spelt J-A-N-E either. It's J-A-Y-N-E.
Okay, got that. Thank you. Now, where do you live, Linda?
Unit 15, 35 Maximilian Way.
That's in Whitfield, right? I have a cousin who lives in that area.
Yes, Whitfield.
And the postcode is 7755.
Not quite. You've got it round the wrong way. It's 5577.
Whoops. Okay, moving on now. Do you work or are you at home during the day?
Well, both actually. I work as a nurse, but I'm on permanent night shift.
Oh, I see. In that case, we won't put down your home phone number because I'm sure you don't want to be disturbed when you're trying to sleep.
Thanks. I appreciate that. You can always leave a message on my mobile if you have to contact me. I have it turned off when I'm sleeping, but I regularly check my voicemail for messages.
And that number is?
0412 214 418.
Good. Now I'll need to see some form of photo ID. Have you got something with you?
Yes, just a minute. Here's my swipe card for the hospital.
Thank you. I just need to make a note of the number. AZ1985331.
Is that all you need?
Just one more thing, your date of birth. But I can get that from the card. One moment.
Look, I'm afraid you haven't copied it down correctly. I was born on the 25th September 1975.
What have I written? Oh yes, I see it now. I've got the 25th of the 8th month, but that would make it August. Thanks for spotting the mistake.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now, listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Well, that's the application form done. Now, I wonder if you'd mind taking part in a survey we're doing.
That's fine. What do you want to know?
Basically, we're trying to find out why people access the internet. I mean, what would you be using it for? Social networking, I suppose.
I don't really think so. I haven't got the time for something like that. But I do want to keep in touch with friends and family, both here and abroad. So I'd mostly be making use of my email account.
I see. A lot of students come in here to do research. Is that something that you might be doing?
I think the internet is a great tool for research, but it's not something that interests me at the moment.
What about checking out a new job?
A lot of my friends use the internet for job hunting, and they say it's the best way to look for a new position. I'm quite settled where I am, though. You can get access to the other classifieds, can't you? Trade and exchange, that kind of thing?
Yes, and I'm told it's a very popular way of buying and selling these days.
Well, I'll definitely be using it for that.
Thanks a lot. Now, do you have any questions?
Is there a charge for the service?
It used to be free, but we've decided to set a one-off payment of $15 for the initial registration.
Oh, that's not bad at all. One more thing. Is there a time limit for each session, like half an hour or something?
Oh, it's better than that. One 60-minute session per day. Quite generous, really, but we're very strict about it.
I'd rarely spend more than 45 minutes on the internet at any one time, so that'll be more than enough. Thank you.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear the secretary of a social club telephoning a tourist information office to get information for a group visit to the town of Tidborough.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hello, this is Tidborough Tourist Office, Derek speaking. How can I help you?
Good afternoon. My name's Clara Swift. I'm the secretary of a social club and we're planning a visit to Tidborough.
Oh, yes.
So I'd like to ask you some questions, if I may, to help with our plans.
Of course. We're here to help.
Now, we're thinking of staying in the youth hostel, as we'll be a group and it's quite cheap.
Yes, and comfortable too.
But could you tell me how far outside the centre it is?
Oh, it's not too bad. It's only 1 kilometre from the station, which is very convenient, and 2 kilometres from the very centre of town. There's a frequent bus service.
That doesn't sound too bad. Actually, I've tried phoning them but had no reply.
Ah, you can check out everything you need to know if you go to www.cheapstay.com. That's their own site. It's quite new. And you could email them with your requirements directly from it.
Well, that sounds good, thank you. We'll be staying in the 3rd week of March. Will there be any special events going on then?
Yes, that includes the 22nd, doesn't it? Good. That's when the street festival is held. It's great fun. Lots going on. It's held every year.
OK.
And when that's finished, if you've any energy left, you and your group might enjoy a concert we're putting on.
Is it classical music or rock?
Well, quite a mixture, actually. The point is that it's all performed by local musicians, and between them, they'll be playing most things.
It sounds a little strange, but I guess it could be interesting. It seems we've chosen a good week to come. Is there anything else on?
Oh, yes, indeed. The City Museum, which was recently completely restored, often has interesting exhibitions. There are some weird and wonderful modern paintings at the moment. That's a good exhibition. Then, opening on March the 24th, when you'll be here, it changes to natural history. I'd recommend it.
Oh, I've made a note of that. Now, some of our group are quite young, and they may prefer to do things that they feel are more active than walking round museums and so on. What will they be able to do?
Throughout March, in fact, the sports centre is going to be closed. But the swimming pool will remain open, and there's the park for general relaxation.
That sounds all right.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
And were you planning to go on any excursions while you were here?
Yes, I was going to ask you. I gather there's a very picturesque train journey out along the coast?
The Beach Express. Yes, it's lovely. It's an old-fashioned train. Not an express at all, in fact, but it chugs along, giving you marvellous views.
Does it go often?
No, it's just a tourist special, really. But it sets off in the morning at 9:30, and it's very popular, so I'd get there no later than 9:15 if I were you. The station opens at 9, so you can get a coffee or something while you wait.
It sounds lovely. And for tickets?
Well, as I say, it may be crowded at the station, so it's probably more convenient to get them beforehand from us at the tourist office. The youth hostel may sell them too. You'd have to check that.
OK, I will, thanks. How much are tickets?
£5, although students get 20% off, and if there are more than 10 of you travelling together, you get 15% off, so it's very reasonable.
Yes, that's not too bad. And is it a long ride?
Not really. I think it's about 3 hours actually in the train. You'll be back for lunch about 4 hours later. It stops twice for half an hour so you can stretch your legs, have a little stroll on one of the beaches.
I see. Well, you've been very helpful. Thank you.
Not at all. I hope you enjoy your visit. Contact us any time.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear two students, called Richard and Shirley, discussing the information they have collected so far for a group project.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi Shirley. Glad you could meet me at the weekend to talk about the research we have to do on energy.
Yes, Richard. I think it's important that we stay focused on the specific area of our research, energy consumption.
Did you know that the demand for electricity is growing faster than coal, oil and gas can supply it?
Yes, indeed. Coal and oil, which I discovered are also known as fossil fuels, could have disastrous effects on world climate.
My research supports you. I also found out that the weather could be affected by global warming.
However, a range of fuels are used around the world. Did you know that the most common fuels are the fossil fuels, with oil accounting for almost half at 45%? Coal and natural gas are equal next at 20%, with nuclear power being the lowest at 7%. Other sources of energy are also near the bottom at 8%.
Before the final part of the conversation, you now have 20 seconds to look at questions 27 to 30. Now answer questions 27 to 30.
That information will be useful when we look at the different energy sources in detail. We also need to look at the pros and cons of each type of energy. We've already said that fossil fuels increase the world's temperature, But we also need to mention the most serious issue, that these three types of fuel are finite, meaning they will not last forever. Another major disadvantage is that by burning coal and oil in particular, chemicals are released into the atmosphere, which combine with water to fall back to Earth and damage both plant and animal life.
That really sounds useful. If you focus on coal, oil and gas, I'll look into nuclear power. It is common knowledge that nuclear power stations create radioactive waste, but I'm particularly interested in how this unwanted waste product is dealt with safely. I'll also need to look at the effects on people living near these power stations.
Yes, I think all those areas need exploring. Do you think I should also look into renewable energy sources, such as wind and sun, energy that never runs out?
Don't you think it's an important area to consider?
Yes, but I don't think I'll have enough time to look at it in enough detail.
I also agree that we have enough to focus on until our next group meeting. So to finish, you could find some information on the advantages of fossil fuels, and I'll give you the facts that I have already on coal, oil and gas. We don't need to look into other energy sources because I'll get more details on the nuclear industry.
That's great. See you in 2 weeks' time.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear part of a lecture about the early history of cinema. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen to the lecture and answer questions 31 to 40.
Now, we all take the wonders of the cinema very much for granted these days, but cinema really is a very recent phenomenon. It has moved from its origins in the simple still camera to the dazzling computer-generated graphics of today in little over 100 years. Perhaps the real beginning of cinema was the cinematograph, a moving camera invented by the Lumiere brothers. As the excitement at the early screenings of short, simple moving pictures spread, competition developed rapidly, and soon cameras such as the American Biograph were on the market. Advertisements asserted that the Biograph did not shake as much as the cinematograph. Meanwhile, permits were required for outside filming, and import licenses were difficult to obtain for equipment, and there were other difficulties for cameramen. When the Lumiere brothers went to film the crowning of Tsar Nicholas II in Russia in 1896, the camera's ticking noise led people to believe it was a bomb. Although this confusion was resolved, disaster struck at the ceremony when a stand of spectators collapsed and the huge crowd panicked. The cameramen kept filming. It was the first time such events had been filmed, and this marked the beginning of a new concept of journalism. Well, the technology continued to develop rapidly, and often secretly. The thrill of invention and the prospect of riches to be made drove experimenters along. But historians of cinema face difficulties in establishing if an apparatus functioned in the way that its makers asserted. Everyone was keen to say that their machine was the best, of course. In some cases, however, we do have reliable records or evidence in the equipment itself, and then we can see the details of the evolution of the technology. By about 1890, for example, The Frenchman Marais had arrived at results of startling clarity in sequential images. He also had the idea of recording images on a long strip of paper that unrolled in front of the lens instead of on separate plates, but he found it impossible initially to ensure that this strip would have regular movement. As we step into the 20th century, however, we see much progress has been made, and there are many examples of what we would today recognise as films. Questions of the art form were now as important as questions of what was technologically possible, and filmmakers searched around for ideas to draw on. Comic strips were very popular at the time in newspapers, and their structure was applied to the planning of films, which were now being mapped in a series of picture panels. Different innovations were achieved by different types of filmmaker, with a certain amount of rivalry between makers of documentaries and makers of fiction films. One area where documentaries led the way was in the use of travelling shots, although of course fiction films adopted this technique in due course. Various sources for stories were developing, and each would have an impact on the way the story was filmed. For example, filmmakers started to use greater numbers of shots when chase films became popular because they wanted to show the various stages of the policeman running after the bandit and so on. And it wasn't just different kinds of story that were driving filmmakers to think up new techniques. Other technology also played its part. The telephone was growing in use, and filmmakers came up with the idea of splitting the screen image into two parts to show telephone conversations. All this growing sophistication in the shooting of films began to make the whole process of creating them more challenging. The very first films consisted of single shots and were straightforward to take from shooting to showing them to audiences. However, as the filming developed into multiple shots, then editing emerged as an essential ingredient of the process. Cinema was growing up. Well, next I'd like to turn your attention to some of the issues that I believe were...
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute.